Hello and welcome to Spill the Tea. True Stories, the place where real life is more fascinating than fiction. Sit back, pour yourself a cup of tea, and let's dive into the moments that stay with us forever. We're starting now. Mid-March, the early evening was drawing to a close. A leaden sky dropped a mixture of snow and rain onto the ground. Underfoot, a muddy slush squelched, treacherously slippery for the unwary steps of passers-by. Mrs. Davies trod with extreme caution, peering into the mess under her feet before taking a step. To add to her pile of troubles, she absolutely did not want to sprawl on this slush, risking a new injury. She found herself within hospital walls far too often as it was. What could she do? Age was taking its toll, and the diagnosis promised nothing cheerful. "Hello, Mrs. Davies." The elderly woman turned around. A tall, stately girl with fiery red hair smiled at her. Mrs. Davies, of course, recognized her, although perhaps she wasn't a Basova anymore, her former student. 3 years ago, Mrs. Davies had graduated this class and left teaching, retiring to a well-deserved rest. They stood for a moment, exchanging a few phrases. It was always heartwarming for the former teacher to hear about the life paths of her pupils. Why, Lily, it turned out, was mastering sciences at the Faculty of Finance and Economics, and even working part-time. Clever girl, a lovely girl. They parted ways. Lily, hurrying about her business, dissolved into the crowd, and Mrs. Davies headed for the shop. The potatoes were running out, and fresh bread would be nice too. She would get just a little of everything. How much did she need for herself alone? Once upon a time, Mrs. Davies, like many colleagues and friends, had exhausted herself with diets. And now? Now she could afford an extra bun, a sweet. But the pleasure of food had left her. Her whole life seemed to have changed course. Headaches began to torment the woman almost immediately after retiring. The whole staff saw her off, at a table set in the school cafeteria. Words of gratitude were spoken in honor of Mrs. Davies. Each colleague recalled something bright. It was a little awkward, but moving to tears. At the time of her departure, Mrs. Davies was only 60. It was frightening to break away from her usual circle of acquaintances, to leave the school where she had worked for almost 40 years, teaching history. But what could she do? The children who couldn't keep up with the curriculum, to whom it was becoming increasingly difficult to find an approach. In short, Mrs. Davies didn't wait to be asked to leave. When she realized that was where things were heading, she wrote the application herself. The newly minted pensioner took a long time to get used to her new routine. At first, she would wake up at 7 in the morning and, out of habit, get ready for work. Only then would she remember that she didn't need to go to school anymore. She would lie down again, but sleep wouldn't come. Then Mrs. Davies would stand by the window and watch the people. Adults hurried to work, children rushed to lessons, and she felt as if she had fallen out of this life, found herself somewhere on its sidelines. "Don't talk nonsense," her old friend Nancy replied to her confessions. "Life only begins in retirement. Enjoy your well-deserved rest." Nancy herself had retired a couple of years earlier, but she couldn't understand Mrs. Davies's state. After all, Nancy had a husband, grown children, and most importantly, grandchildren, 5-year-old twins, Peter and Mary. The parents worked, and the grandparents took care of the little ones. So Nancy had a sense of purpose, someone to care for. How could she understand Mrs. Davies? But things hadn't worked out with her own. No matter how much the woman was treated, no matter which doctors she consulted. Her husband, Arthur, had the opportunity to arrange a consultation with any medical luminary. After all, he headed the local regional clinic. He had connections, but nothing helped, and so it happened. The woman had no children. Both Mrs. Davies herself and her husband. How many children in the world are unwanted by their parents? Mrs. Davies had seen many such children during her years at school, and seemingly the family is prosperous. The child is dressed and shod like something out of a picture. but still, you can see those who lack parental care and warmth. Mrs. Davies and her husband would have been happy to raise Ilya, to make him happy, to show him the world, to raise him into a kind, decent person. But the stork never flew to them. It took Mrs. Davies a long time to come to terms with the idea that she would not become a mother. She didn't give up immediately. She fought to the end, until her health began to fail. It was then, at the first alarming signals. Her friend Nancy, the one who would have a complete set by the age of 100, didn't fully appreciate her happiness, as is often the case with those who are given much. She took the gift from heaven for granted, and even complained to Mrs. Davies periodically, sometimes about her lazy son, sometimes about her fashionable daughter, and to friends with children. If they wanted to, they went on a trip. If they wanted to, they lay around all day watching TV after a hard work week. No homework, no children's clinics, no endless clubs and sections. And still Mrs. Davies suffered. She wanted to give love and affection to a loved one who needed it, and lonely old age frightened her, for it would surely come some day, and there would be no one even to give her a glass of water. And then somehow the realization came that everyone has their own destiny. Mrs. Davies had this one. Not the worst, frankly. She had a loving husband, financial security, a beloved job. It was to her work that the woman gave both her heart and soul. There were always enough children at school who needed her help. She saw such children, tried to notice their problems, support them in difficult situations. Some, besides her, had no one to rely on in this life at all. And they were so vulnerable, still so defenseless. The stories of her students still came back to Mrs. Davies in the smallest details. Take Sam Sizemore, for example. Everyone had written him off. The principal himself predicted the boy would end up in prison in the near future. Teachers refused to conduct lessons if the boy was in the classroom. Sam was bullied from all sides. All he needed was a heart-to-heart talk with someone who would understand him, pity him. Mrs. Davies turned out to be such a person. Sam had problems at home. His father drank, lashed out at the children, beat his wife. Mrs. Davies understood that Sam Sizemore would perish in such a family. She used all her connections and arranged for the difficult but very intelligent boy to attend a cadet school. Boarding, strict discipline, all this did its job. Now Sam, who was considered a future criminal at school, holds a leadership position in the Ministry of Internal Affairs, is married, happy, and quite prosperous. And he still doesn't forget to call his favorite teacher, visits her, and thanks her again for playing such an important role in his destiny. Or Anna Miller, a quiet, withdrawn girl who couldn't even open her mouth at the blackboard. She got weak C's. They were given for quiet, trouble-free behavior. Little Anna had a degree of cerebral palsy, so the girl stood out from her peers, walked a little awkwardly, and her legs would periodically cramp. Mrs. Davies felt sorry for Anna, and she began to pay attention to her. And somehow they got talking, that Anna was a deeply understanding person beyond her years, a little sage. Anna confided her secret to Mrs. Davies. It turned out that the girl secretly wrote poetry, but didn't show it to anyone. She was shy. Mrs. Davies helped Anna believe in herself, and also introduced her to local poets. They appreciated the girl's talent from a professional point of view, took her under their wing and patronage. Now Anna is the author of several books and the head of a literary club at a local university. She found herself and no longer seems like the quiet, withdrawn girl she used to be. Anna is a real star. There were such happy stories in Mrs. Davies's life. It wasn't always possible to help a child. Take Kathy, for example. Kathy Sergeyeva, a thin, tall girl with long hair the color of ripe rye. A true Russian beauty. Fair skin, bottomless blue eyes, regular, pleasant features. Kathy. This little girl had serious problems at home. Kathy's father either died or ran away many years ago. The girl didn't even remember him. Since then, her mother had always dreamed of sorting out her personal life. She was a young and quite striking woman who changed boyfriends like gloves, and it wouldn't be so bad if she just changed them. She chased after them all over the country and, of course, dragged the child with her. Kathy came to Mrs. Davies's school in the 8th grade. She never stayed longer than a year and a half, all because of her mother's craving for adventure. Kathy's mother worked as a hairdresser, a profession where it's easy to find a job in any city. Or you don't have to work officially, you can work from home, which is what the woman often did. Kathy had to move to this city because of her mother's new suitor, another stepfather. He was a long-distance truck driver, and he met Kathy's mother by chance in a bar. Well, he took her in. Mrs. Davies noticed immediately that Kathy was not living well at home. Her eye was sharp. She had seen such children. She sensed their trouble. The teacher began to watch the girl more closely. Kathy kept to herself. No one bullied her, no one teased her, but she didn't particularly socialize with anyone either. She avoided talking to the girls, tried not to participate in school-wide events. The girl stayed at school late. She would sit in the library, read something, do her homework, clearly delaying the moment of returning home. One day, Mrs. Davies stayed late at school. A parent-teacher meeting unexpectedly dragged on. When they dispersed, it was already dark. Mrs. Davies noticed a lone, hunched figure on a park bench in the schoolyard. The sensitive woman immediately understood. This person was clearly in trouble. She approached closer, looked carefully. Kathy was sitting on the bench in the school garden. Seeing Mrs. Davies, she was at first flussled, embarrassed. The teacher was able to get her to talk. She understood what the girl wanted to hear and feel. She saw she was in need of something, of the participation and sympathy of an adult, strong person. Kathy spoke little at first. She was shy. But then she gradually opened up, told Mrs. Davies about her life. The teacher, who had seen the light, learned a lot. She couldn't stand this woman. It turned out she had more than once blamed her daughter for her failures in her personal life, because supposedly it was hard to find a good man with a child. And Kathy's mother's men were varied. There were indifferent ones who didn't notice the girl at all. There were also aggressive, irritable ones. The current stepfather constantly found fault with Kathy. In his opinion, she never did anything right. He also shouted at her mother, sometimes even hit her, especially when he had been drinking. Mrs. Davies discovered a terrible thing. Kathy. She didn't want to go home. That's why she constantly stayed late in the library. And when it was warm, she would wander the streets until night, or sit somewhere until the very last minute, and only then return to the apartment. There was nowhere else for her to go. With an aggressive man and a constantly irritated mother, Kathy felt that she was unwanted by anyone in her family, that she was just in everyone's way, that everyone would be much better off without her. The girl poured her heart out to the teacher, and tears streamed down her cheeks as she did so. Mrs. Davies hugged Kathy, said something soothing, and was angry at Kathy's mother. This woman didn't appreciate the gift fate had given her at all. Such a wonderful girl, beautiful, sensitive, capable. She didn't study very well, it's true. But it's no wonder. When was she supposed to do her homework if she tried to get home by the time everyone was asleep, so as not to disturb them? That's what she learned from her mother, not to provoke rudeness or even punishment. And she became even more attentive to Kathy. A warm, trusting relationship developed between them. Sometimes the girl would now go to the teacher's house after school. It was quiet there, calm. She could prepare for lessons. Kathy even improved her studies. Arthur, Mrs. Davies's husband, was shocked. He initiated a check by the guardianship authorities. He thought, perhaps, at least this authority would hold the irresponsible adults accountable, force them to start taking care of the child. But the results of the check showed that the family was quite prosperous. The apartment was renovated. The child had a separate sleeping place. The refrigerator was full of food. Mrs. Davies choked on this lie, on the departure from the very sad reality. But what could it be? Kathy didn't write poetry. She couldn't sing. She didn't want to dance. Needlework didn't appeal to her. Mrs. Davies couldn't find what would help Kathy endure. The girl needed strength to grow into a normal person, to become strong, independent. Kathy transformed from an awkward girl into a pretty young woman. She still didn't have friends among her classmates, but she started socializing with girls and boys from the vocational school located near the school. Mrs. Davies watched her student closely. She feared that her life circumstances would force her onto a slippery slope. The woman talked a lot with the girl, told her about the various dangers that teenagers face today. In essence, she was doing her mother's important job. "Kathy, dear," she nodded her head, promised not to do anything foolish, and thanked Mrs. Davies every time for her involvement. "You do more for me than my mother," Kathy would sometimes say. "Nonsense," Mrs. Davies would object. "Your mother feeds you, waters you, shoes you, and you warm me." Mrs. Davies saw that Kathy was drawn to her, that the girl listened to her opinion. And yet, she worried about her very much. You never know? Kathy, dear, was at such a difficult and dangerous age, and her only significant adult was her history teacher. It shouldn't be like that. And then Kathy disappeared. The evening before, she had visited Mrs. Davies. The teacher was happy, invited her to the table. The girl had dinner with Mrs. Davies. They talked a lot that evening. They laughed. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. And only just before leaving, Kathy suddenly handed Mrs. Davies a locket. Inexpensive, but pretty. Costume jewelry locket, silver-plated. "This is for you. Thank you very much, it's a lovely thing. But there's no holiday, is there? Take it anyway. Thank you, Kathy." Kathy left, and only then did Mrs. Davies realize that the locket opened. Inside was a photograph of Kathy. It was clear the picture had been taken recently. The girl smiled cheerfully into the lens and looked like a model. A beauty. Mrs. Davies was happy with the gift. She took it as a sign of attention, of care. A teacher, a sensitive, delicate girl, a grateful teenager is a rarity today. And yet this gesture immediately seemed strange and even alarming to Mrs. Davies. And the next day, Kathy was gone. She didn't appear at school. She wasn't at home either. Her mother was out late at night. But this time it was clear that something extraordinary had happened. Kathy, being a minor, was immediately searched for. It was no joke. A 16-year-old teenager had disappeared. Posters were even put up around the city. There were many theories about the girl's fate, including that she had become the victim of some visiting criminal. But Mrs. Davies was sure Kathy had simply run away, perhaps not even alone. The girl had known the evening before that she would leave. And this locket with the photo, it was her farewell gift. Mrs. Davies told the investigator about this detail, but he didn't take her words into account. He dismissed them. The leading theory at the time was kidnapping. Kathy was never found. Her mother, after a bout, met a new boyfriend and drove off with him into unknown distances. She, like Mrs. Davies, was sure. Her daughter was alive. She had just run off somewhere because she didn't want to study, and they made her at home. She found herself a boyfriend and was now enjoying life, youth, and freedom. Mrs. Davies never heard from her student again, although she tried several times to find out her fate. The locket remained as a memory of the girl. It was now kept in her jewelry box. Sometimes Mrs. Davies would take it out, open it, and gaze at Kathy's cheerful, beautiful face. Where was this girl now, who was no longer a girl at all, but a grown woman? How had her fate turned out? For some reason, it seemed that such a story could not end well. Mrs. Davies blamed herself. She blamed herself for not stopping Kathy that evening, for not asking her more about her plans. After all, the unexpected gift had made the woman uneasy. But the girl, she had looked quite happy then. Yes, happy. It was strange, but comforting. Mrs. Davies thought that perhaps the girl's life had finally improved because a joyful spark shone in her eyes. And look how it all turned out. "You can't save everyone," Arthur would comfort his wife. He saw how she was tormented by guilt. "I know for sure things like this happen in the hospital. Trouble just happens. Even if you did everything to prevent it, there's nothing you can do about it." Mrs. Davies understood. Her husband was right, but she still tormented herself with thoughts of Kathy. The worst thing was the uncertainty. She wanted so much to believe that everything had worked out well for this girl, but that was self-deception. What good could happen to a runaway teenager, unwanted by her parents? Arthur, her beloved husband, best friend, closest person. So smart and serious, so strict and responsible at work, so tender and kind with her, with Mrs. Davies. They had been together since they were 20. They met at an amusement park as students, and they never parted after that, until death separated them 7 years ago. Arthur worked in a leadership position, chief doctor of the regional hospital. A stressful job, a responsible one. He was loved and respected for his professionalism. Arthur loved his work, and Mrs. Davies understood him in this. She felt the same way about her own work. And so Arthur passed away, right at his workplace from a sudden heart attack. So many doctors were nearby, and they couldn't save him. "Trouble just happens," Arthur had said once. And so it happened. Trouble. Mrs. Davies fell into apathy. Perhaps only her work pulled her out of it then. At school, whether you wanted to or not, you had to keep going. Students and colleagues distracted Mrs. Davies, gradually bringing her back to life. And then retirement. And Mrs. Davies felt completely alone and unwanted. This wasn't how she had imagined this time. They would travel. They had the money for it. Mrs. Davies's husband had been serious, responsible, and had set up a savings account a long time ago. Money was accumulating there for their happy old age. Only Mrs. Davies's old age turned out not to be so happy. 2 years after retirement passed in a mode of adapting to a new life. No notebooks, no school bells, no answers, no meetings in the principal's office, no New Year's corporate parties and fun school holidays. Mrs. Davies thought about getting a dacha, working the land, only she realized in time that she couldn't manage a plot alone. If only Arthur were there, it would be a different matter. Instead, the woman set up a real greenhouse in the living room. Flowers were now not only on the windowsill, they were everywhere. Mrs. Davies's personal home garden. There were even 2 birch trees in tubs. The woman enjoyed caring for the plants. After all, they, like children, needed care, attention, and love. Mrs. Davies paused to catch her breath. These walks were already difficult for her. The insidious disease was making itself known. And what would happen next? After all, the doctors had made it clear. There are no miracles. Mrs. Davies's condition would only worsen. How difficult it was at such a moment not to have family and loved ones nearby. Mrs. Davies's head sometimes ached before, so at first she didn't pay attention to the alarming symptoms. Her head would ache, she would take a pill, and everything would be fine again. Then dizziness and nausea were added, and the migraines were making themselves known every day now. So the elderly woman went to the hospital. She was prescribed all the necessary procedures: tests, ultrasound, MRI. The verdict of the attending physician sounded like a bolt from the blue: an inoperable, rapidly progressing tumor. Nothing could be done. The only thing the doctors could do was relieve the pain. "And how much time do I have?" the woman asked, looking the doctor directly in the eyes. "Tell me honestly and frankly. I have no one. I need to finish all my affairs myself somehow, you understand? I need to know how much time I have." "Well, it's hard to say. It depends on how the disease behaves. I think at least a year. Maximum. Well, in your case, no more than 2 years." A year. Only 2 summers, 2 New Years, 2 birthdays. At best. Only then did Mrs. Davies realize how much she, it turned out, loved her life. Even this one, childless, lonely. She became afraid. truly afraid. At first, she even had trouble falling asleep. She kept thinking about the approaching end. And so a year passed. The last months of Mrs. Davies's stay on this earth began to flow. The woman had gotten used to this thought. It no longer frightened her so much. Mrs. Davies knew. When things got really bad, she would go to a hospice, under the care of doctors. They would take care of her there. She just wanted that moment to come as late as possible, because Mrs. Davies had plants. Who would take care of them in her absence? And besides, lately the woman had especially appreciated life. She admired the white clouds. The warm sun made her happy. Even in these gray, leaden clouds that now covered the sky, she saw some special beauty, restrained and cold. Mrs. Davies caught her breath and walked on. Her path led to the shop. She deliberately chose a supermarket farther from home. To get there, she had to walk through the park. The weather, of course, was not conducive to walks, and it was already difficult for Mrs. Davies to move around. But without this physical activity, the body might give up sooner than possible. The doctors recommended Mrs. Davies daily walks, so she walked. Mrs. Davies chose this time. Rush hour. People returning from work walked past her at a brisk pace. Some still had to stop at the shop, some at the kindergarten for their child. They all seemed to live in some other time, hurrying, bustling. Mrs. Davies, on the other hand, could afford to walk at a leisurely pace and admire the surrounding scenery. And once upon a time, just like all this young people, she had hurried, run, rushed. And suddenly Mrs. Davies's attention was drawn to a hunched figure on a park bench. The sensitive woman immediately understood. This person was clearly in trouble. She approached closer, looked carefully. A very young woman was sitting on the bench, dark-skinned, black-eyed. Her clothes were old, cheap. In her arms she held a bundle. Such babies are usually discharged from the maternity hospital. She was rocking the bundle and crying. Yes, crying. Real tears streamed down her cheeks. No one noticed these tears. People rushed past on their business. They didn't even pay attention to the girl on the bench. And if someone did glance at her, they still wouldn't have seen the tears. The stranger with the baby in her arms was sitting half-turned, with her back to the main path of the park. Perhaps she didn't want to be seen in such a state. Mrs. Davies realized that now she definitely couldn't leave. The girl looked to be just over 20, and a baby in her arms. She couldn't just leave her in trouble. The elderly woman hesitated for a long time before speaking to the stranger. It felt awkward to bother people with questions. How would this girl perceive her attention? But Mrs. Davies saw no other way. "Hello," the elderly woman said, sitting down next to the girl on the bench. "Forgive my curiosity, but what has happened to you? Can I help you in any way?" The girl turned her tear-stained face to Mrs. Davies. Surprise was in her burning black eyes. She clearly hadn't expected anyone to show sympathy. "Thank you," the girl replied politely, "but I doubt you can help me with anything. My situation is completely hopeless." "That's not true. There's always a way out. I'm telling you this from the height of my years. There's no such thing as no way out." Her Sobiesednica, Mrs. Davies, smiled warmly. "There is. I would tell you, but the story is very long and not very pretty. You're probably in a hurry?" "Well, I have plenty of free time," Mrs. Davies replied, "and I love all sorts of life stories." "And what time is it now?" The girl suddenly perked up. "Almost 6. The kindergarten is open until 7, so I still have an hour. If you have time, then listen." Lena was born in a Roma camp. She and her mother were treated differently from others, dismissively. Lena was punished in completely different ways. The girl always got more. As she got older, she understood what was going on. Her mother was a stranger here. 70 years ago, a young girl, still almost a child, ran away with her beloved to the camp. Lena's grandmother, her father's mother, adored her granddaughter despite everything. Lena was the only girl among the children of her grandmother's sons, long awaited. Finally, the old woman would say, the one to whom I can pass on my gift is born. Grandmother never hurt Lena. They often talked for a long time, walked together through the meadows and steppes where the camp was staying at that time. Grandmother showed her granddaughter medicinal plants, told her about their power, and often held the girl's hand. During this time, Lena felt a warmth transfer from her grandmother to her. The Roma said that this was how old Esmeralda was passing on her gift to the girl, little by little, despite the priceless gift being received by a stranger. Yes, Lena was called a stranger in the camp, and this was despite the fact that she had lived among these people since birth. Needless to say, the attitude towards the girl's mother was much colder. Lena remembered her mother as a silent and indifferent to everything beautiful woman. Her father, having brought her low in the camp, quickly grew cold to his beloved, and the pressure of the people played a role. He had long since acquired a new wife, who had given him 3 sons one after another. And Lena and her mother lived with grandmother. Esmeralda loved her granddaughter and spent a lot of time with her, but she kept Lena's mother more as a servant, silent. At least the old woman didn't pity her daughter-in-law. Lena had always, as long as she could remember, felt pity for her mother. Even as a small child, she understood. Something had broken this beautiful, still very young woman. Some external circumstances had turned her into such a weak-willed, indifferent person. Mother. Even her own daughter didn't concern her. She was always in some world of her own, like an enchanted princess. She performed grandmother's errands like a robot, mechanically. She spoke little, only when necessary. And she never hugged Lena. And she so wanted to feel her mother's embrace, to see tenderness and love in her eyes, or at least interest. Grandmother didn't love Mother, but that feeling wasn't the main one. Esmeralda gave her a roof over her head, food, clothing, and Grandmother tried to heal Mother, to bring her back to a full life. Lena saw this with her own eyes. Esmeralda gave the young woman some concoctions, read strange spells over her. The girl so hoped it would work. But Mother remained the same, cold, indifferent, unresponsive. My strength is not enough to cope with this, Grandmother would sometimes lament. Deep, deep in her soul sits sorrow, longing. No one has ever loved her. This is terrible, you understand? It cripples the soul. That's why your mother couldn't bear it. But I love her, Lena exclaimed. That's what gives hope. Perhaps not all is lost yet. And also, Grandmother sees your gift, a little more, and when it fully transfers to Lena, it will blossom with new strength. You will be stronger than me. The old woman smiled, stroking her granddaughter's hair. They, all these Roma who don't accept you now, will fawn over you. They will even beg you to save them or their children from illnesses. Many things can be corrected with different skills, using herbs and concoctions. Just use the gift in truly serious cases. It's not a toy. When you grow up, you'll understand. And then, one day, when Lena was only 11 years old, her mother suddenly fell ill. She was as quiet, unemotional, and absent as always. She lay ill for a week, the bed serving as her bed, and didn't get up in the morning. She lay quiet, pale, detached, and breathed very heavily. Grandmother became worried, took out her potions and old books, and sent Lena outside. The girl sat near the wagon, leaning her back against the wall, and prayed to all powers that Grandmother would manage to pull Mother through. Only some inner feeling told her it wouldn't work. And so it happened. Lena sat outside for about 3 hours. And then Grandmother came out to her. From her sad face, the girl immediately understood everything. Mother was no more. Lena took the loss hard. Yes, Mother had never shown any feelings for her daughter, but still, even her presence gave Lena strength. And most importantly, hope always lived in the girl's heart. Hope that someday everything would be different. Mother would wake up from her stupor, the spell would break, she would smile at her daughter, hug her, and a completely different life would begin. Happy, bright, warm. Grandmother supported her granddaughter as best she could and tried to understand what the child was feeling now. 2 years passed, and then one morning, Esmeralda sat Lena down in front of her, having first warned her that they would have a serious conversation. "I had a dream today," Grandmother began. "A difficult dream. I understood that I would soon be gone." "No, Grandmother," Lena exclaimed. After her mother's death, her most terrible fear was losing Grandmother, because then she would be completely alone. Her father had completely forgotten about her existence, living with his new family. The other Roma also didn't accept Lena. Only Grandmother, only she in the whole world truly loved Lena. Let Grandmother stop saying such terrible words. "Lena, you must understand. It has to be this way. It's happening. Give me your hand. I will pass my gift on to you completely. I no longer need it." Lena obediently held out her palm to Grandmother. She squeezed it with her dry, thin hand, and the girl felt the familiar warmth as if flowing from Grandmother to her. A pleasant feeling. But this time it was frightening. Grandmother was never wrong, and now she was surely telling the truth, too. "How will I be without you?" "I know, my dear. You are afraid." Grandmother stroked her granddaughter's head. She looked at her with inexpressible sadness. It was clear that Grandmother also didn't want to leave the girl without her support. Without her, Lena was very weak and vulnerable. "You were never accepted here." "Listen carefully. When I am gone, leave the camp. Otherwise, they will make a servant out of you, wear you out with physical labor. Your gift must serve good people. It was given to you for that, to save people. So as soon as I am gone, go. At night. It will be warm, good. You will easily reach the city. Any city that happens to be nearby at that moment. Ask people where the shelter, the orphanage is, and go there yourself. Ask to be taken in as a child. They won't refuse. You will be among strangers, but you will be warm and fed. You will grow up, become strong." Lena watched her grandmother, looking for signs of illness. But she looked as usual, cheerful, lively, quick. The girl began to think that Grandmother was mistaken, or that the terrible thing that was supposed to happen wouldn't happen anytime soon. But one morning, Grandmother didn't get out of bed as usual. Lena, already knowing what was wrong, slowly approached her loved one and made sure that Grandmother was no longer here, but somewhere very, very far away. Only her body remained here. The girl cried loudly. She cried for a long time, trembling convulsively and shrugging her shoulders. But after that, she felt a little better. Then Lena sat down right on the floor near Grandmother's bed and thought hard. Grandmother was gone. She had to leave. And it was better to do it right now, before any of the adults found out and stopped her. Lena understood. They didn't love her here because she was a stranger. Some were even hostile towards her. People were only restrained by Grandmother, who had great authority in the camp. She helped the Roma get rid of toothaches, calmed migraines. Because of this, they tolerated her granddaughter. And now Lena had no protector. So it was time to follow Grandmother's advice, run away from the camp wherever her eyes looked. Lena knew. The city was not far. They had driven past such a nice, cozy little town the evening before. Lena admired its lights, the distant towers and tall buildings she could see. Not a metropolis, but not a tiny town either. There was definitely a children's shelter there, and more than one. So that's where Lena needed to go. The girl quickly packed her few belongings into a backpack and, unnoticed by anyone, left the camp. She walked a long way along a country road through wide fields, trudging towards the city. The unknown both frightened and captivated her. Tears streamed down the girl's cheeks from the abundance of emotions. She didn't even wipe them away. No one could see anyway. Lena felt tiny, insignificant, weak to herself. But the girl knew. Somewhere inside her sat a strong gift. It wouldn't let her perish, it would help her in a difficult situation. Finally, the girl reached the city, asked people for directions to the orphanage, found the institution, opened the door, and asked to be taken to the director. A strict lady in glasses listened to the girl's story attentively. It was a pre-prepared story, which, however, contained a grain of truth. Lena said that she was born and raised in a camp. She didn't specify that she was only half Roma. And then her parents died. The Roma turned the girl into a servant. Another adult widower threatened to take her as his wife. In short, Lena ran away from such a hard life. She chose her own path, a different one. She no longer wanted to live in the camp, but dreamed of studying, getting a profession. It was difficult, but somehow Lena was registered. She got the necessary documents. The girl took a long time to get used to her new life. Everything was different here. It was confusing. High beds instead of sleeping mats, clean, ironed bed linen, different clothes, different food, a strict daily routine, studying. Lena liked to study. She had a lot to catch up on, so the girl dedicated herself. At first, Lena was treated as a stranger here too. Of course, exotic appearance, unusual story. But it wasn't contempt and alienation, like in the camp. Lena aroused interest. In the first few months of her stay at the orphanage, she had to tell her story several dozen times. She even became a local celebrity. Then life settled into a routine. Lena finished 9 grades, studied to be a commodity expert, came of age, and graduated from the orphanage. She received a small apartment from the state as an orphan and got a job. Not in her profession, though. Experience was needed there, and where was a recent college graduate supposed to get it? She stood behind the counter at a supermarket. The pay wasn't bad, at least. In short, Lena felt quite happy, and, most importantly, normal, not a second-class person, as she had in the camp. A full-fledged person. She now perceived that past life as some kind of fairy tale. Much of what had happened to her then seemed like fiction, fantasy. For example, that grandmother's gift, which she supposedly passed on to her granddaughter. Time passed, and this superpower didn't manifest itself in any way. So Lena decided that she had imagined it all. It hadn't happened, and that was that. One day, renovations were started at the supermarket where Lena worked, and the employees, who were temporarily unable to serve customers, had to take turns watching the workers. During one of her shifts, Lena met a handsome guy. Tall, lean, athletic, fair hair, light blue eyes, a kind gaze, an open smile. This guy immediately showed interest in the young cashier, winked at her cheerfully. The girl smiled back, showing that she was not at all against getting acquainted. Young men had approached her before. Lena had an interesting and bright appearance and knew it perfectly well. But things never went beyond a couple of dates. These suitors disappointed the girl. But with Andrew, everything turned out completely differently. Somehow, from the first glance, a strong and very warm feeling began to grow between them. Lena understood this immediately. They didn't date for long. After a few dates, they decided to live together in Lena's apartment. Andrew wasn't local. He was born in a village in a large family. Well, and he was now working on a construction site, slaving away. He dreamed of a house, not an apartment, and for now he was living in rented accommodation. Andrew immediately took on all the men's work around the house. He glued the wallpaper, fixed the long crooked curtain rod, repaired the wardrobe. And it also turned out that he cooked wonderfully. In general, it seemed there was nothing Andrew couldn't do. His life was like that. He had to learn everything. They were good together, warm, cozy. The young people understood each other with half a word, and sometimes no words were needed. Finally, Lena felt happy and loved. She hadn't even dreamed of such a relationship. Andrew and Lena got married, and soon after, the young wife realized she was expecting. The future parents' joy knew no bounds. They weren't afraid that their responsibilities would soon increase. Everything was fine with them. They had a roof over their heads. They didn't complain about their financial situation, as Andrew earned well at his construction job. Their son George, the firstborn, was born. Andrew chose his name. It was his grandfather's name, a kind and hard-working man. A year and a half later, a daughter, Catherine, appeared in the family. Lena named her after her mother. The cares of the little ones, household chores, all this delighted and truly captivated Lena. She enjoyed her role as wife and mother. Yes, at times it was difficult. But it was all for her loved ones. For her husband, reliable, caring Andrew. For Georgie and little Catherine, so sweet and funny. The little ones started kindergarten, and things became a little easier. Lena started getting ready to go back to work, decided to leave her second maternity leave a little earlier. The couple had ambitious plans. They both dreamed of expanding, turning their one-bedroom apartment into a two-bedroom or even three-bedroom. And only then could they think about a house. More space, and besides, it was already cramped for such a large family in one room. And then Lena realized she was expecting another child. This time she was scared. They hadn't planned on becoming a large family so soon, and besides, it wasn't the right time. Andrew was supportive, calmed her down, assured her that everything would be fine. "I'll just work more, that's all. There are plenty of opportunities for extra work on the construction site." Trouble happened when Lena was already in the last month before the birth of their youngest daughter. There was only a little time left. That morning, she didn't want to let her husband go to work. A vague premonition of trouble washed over her. Lena chased away the bad thoughts, explained everything by her condition. After all, she was due soon. And just 2 hours later, Lena received a call with the terrible news. Andrew had been crushed by a concrete block at the construction site. Of course, they couldn't save him. Lena sobbed, howled like a wounded animal. Fortunately, the children were at kindergarten. She could give vent to her feelings. The woman cursed fate, which had once again treated her so cruelly, called Andrew back. And then somehow she suddenly felt his presence. It was inexplicable. She just knew that Andrew was here. He saw her, wanted to comfort her, but couldn't, and it hurt him. Lena pulled herself together, said out loud that she loved Andrew very much, realizing that she would no longer have the opportunity to be heard by him, and also that she understood perfectly. She now had to be strong, brave for their children. "You can be at peace about us. I will manage." And Lena tried. She tried very hard to be strong, although sometimes it was simply unbearable. Because of the stress, labor began prematurely. She had to leave the children with the neighbors. Where else could she put them? The original plan was that Andrew would take time off while Lena was in the maternity hospital, but fate had twisted everything this way. The girl was born small, but strong and viable. Lena named her Anna. That's what Andrew had wanted. And the young woman was left with 3 small children in her arms, without any support. Lena applied for all possible benefits, but the money still wasn't enough. The children grew quickly. They constantly needed new clothes and shoes. And also, they were often sick. She had to spend fabulous sums at pharmacies. But what could she do? Health comes first. This is where her gift would have come in handy. If only she could rid her little ones of these endless colds and sore throats. But the gift was dormant. Or maybe there was no gift at all. Money was very scarce, and Lena took a step that later seemed like a fatal mistake. She took out a loan. The money, so necessary for the family, was in her hands instantly. Lena bought groceries, medicine, updated the children's wardrobe. but the amount had to be repaid with high interest. At first, Lena paid the debt regularly. But then the children got sick again, she had to spend a fortune on treatment, and Lena missed a payment. As a result, they put her on the clock. The debt began to grow at a frantic pace. This was a common scheme. Lena was not the only one who fell into this trap. In short, collectors began to harass the young woman. Lena couldn't go back to work. Little Anna was still too young. She couldn't even leave her for a couple of hours, for example, to clean the stairwell. In short, Lena lost her apartment. It was taken for debts, as the woman had taken out the loan against the property as collateral. Lena clutched her head. Where could she go with 3 little ones? What had she done? The neighbors advised her to register at a special shelter. She could live there for about 3 months. People are given time to find a job, to get settled in life somehow. But what was Lena to do? Who would hire a woman with 3 children in her arms, one of whom was an infant? And how could she work if she couldn't leave Anna with anyone, and the older ones were constantly sick and couldn't attend kindergarten? Well, that's my whole story. Of course I couldn't find a job or an apartment in a week. How could I? I have little Anna. Where would I take her? And what now? The former teacher gasped. Lena's story was simply incredible. In places it even resembled a fairy tale. But this was not a movie, this was real life, and the young woman with 3 little ones truly had nowhere to go. How terrible! They'll take them to a shelter. They'll grow up in state institutions like I did, only with a living mother who is so worthless that she can't provide them with normal living conditions. Saying this, Lena started crying again. Quietly, unnoticed. But Mrs. Davies, of course, saw everything and understood perfectly well the desperate situation the young woman was in. "Here's what," the old woman said resolutely. "Move in with me." It was a strange, risky offer, to invite an unfamiliar family into her home. Mrs. Davies knew that her neighbors and acquaintances would condemn her, but she didn't care. Lena and her children needed help. If she didn't reach out now, the little ones would go to a shelter, and their mother straight to the street. 4 broken lives. Mrs. Davies had nothing. She was living out her days. And Mrs. Davies would do it, even at her own risk. What was there to lose? Lena didn't believe her ears at first. "What about your relatives? They'll be against it, won't they?" "I don't have anyone." Mrs. Davies placed her hand on Lena's shoulder. "Let's go to the kindergarten for your little ones. Then we'll stop by the shop. We need to buy something for dinner. I have guests now." With each passing day, Mrs. Davies became more and more happy about that chance meeting with the young woman in the park. Lena turned out to be a very pleasant and kind person, hard-working, grateful, sensitive. And her children. Mrs. Davies's heart melted with tenderness when she watched them. Serious, thoughtful George, chatty little Catherine, plump, bright little Anna. Mrs. Davies baked them pancakes and pies, feeling like a grandmother. This feeling was so pleasant, words couldn't describe it. Mrs. Davies and Lena often had heartfelt conversations. They both needed this warmth, care, attention, the absence of the feeling of total loneliness and uselessness. Complete strangers in just a few weeks. So she had to tell Lena about her diagnosis. "If only I had that gift," she shook her head bitterly. Time passed. Mrs. Davies's condition worsened. This was natural, and the doctors had warned her right away. That's how it happens. It was time to move to the hospice, under the care of medics. Lena saw Mrs. Davies off with tears in her eyes. Everything was in the ambulance. Although the elderly woman had tried to dissuade her from this troublesome step, after all, she would have to go home with tiny little Anna in her arms. Mrs. Davies had taken care of Lena in advance. She had willed her the apartment. The neighbors, of course, gossiped. "She'll kill you," instead of getting her hands on the apartment sooner. "She'll poison you or come up with something else." But Mrs. Davies was sure of Lena. You couldn't fake that. The elderly woman was a good judge of people. Lena was truly attached to her and was very afraid of losing her. Lena herself had said this many times and even cried. "What is happening? Why do all my loved ones leave? Why am I always left alone in the end?" Lena, upon learning of Mrs. Davies's terrible diagnosis, broke down and sobbed, quite sincerely. Mrs. Davies comforted her, promised that everything would be all right. Lena later apologized to her for her weakness. It was quiet, calm, and cozy in the hospice. Friendly doctors, high doses of medication to control the pain and attacks. Mrs. Davies spent her time in a semi-sleep. Her head felt light, her soul was calm. Lena visited her often, placed her palm on her forehead, looked attentively, straight into her eyes. After she left, Mrs. Davies felt better, more cheerful. She somehow felt stronger. Perhaps from the feeling that someone needed her, someone worried about her, cared for her. Several weeks passed. To her surprise, Mrs. Davies felt better. She even had the strength for walks in the hospital garden. Again she admired the flowers, the bright blue sky, enjoying this farewell gift from fate to the fullest. She might not have another such improvement in her condition. Her test results, strangely enough, also improved. The doctors were surprised, but said that this sometimes happens. Time quiets down before a decisive blow. Mrs. Davies suddenly had a strong desire to visit home one more time, to see Lena and her little ones, to breathe in the familiar scent of her apartment, to take something from there as a keepsake. The locket, the one Kathy had given her many years ago. A memorable item with a history. It would be good to have it with her here, in the hospice, as a reminder of home, of her past life. Mrs. Davies asked the doctor for permission. He gave her the okay to go home. Mrs. Davies called a taxi and went. It was so amazing. She hadn't thought she would ever leave the hospice walls alive. It wasn't a recovery, of course, not a deliverance from the illness, but not to feel pain, to be able to go wherever her heart desired. She felt strength in her legs and arms, and a pleasant lightness throughout her body. Mrs. Davies opened the door with her key. The apartment was quiet and empty. Everything was clear. Lena was out for a walk with Anna. The little ones were at kindergarten. Mrs. Davies walked through the familiar rooms, touched her favorite things. The rocking chair, the plush bear Arthur had once won for her at a shooting range, the soft blanket. Here was the bedside table with the drawer where her jewelry was kept. Mrs. Davies wasn't interested in expensive chains and rings. She came for that very locket. The elderly woman found the desired item, opened the locket, and admired Kathy's cheerful face. "Where is she now?" Then a sound was heard. Mrs. Davies hurried to meet it. "You're home!" Lena gasped. She sat little Anna down and approached Mrs. Davies. Joy and surprise were in Lena's eyes. "Yes, well, I felt better. They let me come home for a little while." "Better?" Lena smiled. "Really? Did it really work?" "What worked?" Mrs. Davies didn't understand. "It's all my gift, you see. I was worried about you. I didn't want to lose another loved one. I've had many losses in my life as it is. When the children weren't looking, I even cried. And one day I had a dream. My grandmother, Esmeralda the Roma woman. She strictly told me that I had to stop crying, that now was the time to show my gift. Yes, grandmother said it would be difficult, and it cost her a lot of effort. And it would all be in vain if I didn't pull you through. And I did it. I awakened the power within me. I think grandmother helped too." Mrs. Davies blinked in confusion. "Well, is that really true?" And then she remembered how light she felt every time after Lena's visits, how warm her hands were. Not just warm. Mrs. Davies had thought even then that she was just imagining it because of her illness. "What do the doctors say?" Lena herself seemed not to fully believe in this miracle yet. "Well, they said the tests improved, but it could just be the calm before the storm." "There won't be any storm," Lena smiled broadly and then hugged Mrs. Davies tightly. The storm is cancelled. My gift has awakened. It has awakened so that I can save you. You understand? You don't believe it? You'll see. Everything will be fine. Now Lena, overflowing with emotion, threw up her hands. Her coal-black eyes shone with joy. Little Anna didn't understand anything, but she sensed that something good was happening, and she smiled too, just like her mother. "Oh, what's that in your hand?" Lena finally noticed the locket. "What an interesting thing. I feel it has some special energy, warm, good." It's a gift from one of my students. A former one, of course. It was a long time ago. Mrs. Davies still couldn't fully process what Lena had said. Does this mean the imminent end is cancelled? She will live longer? And now she wanted to live more than ever. And there were the little ones who loved her so much and needed her so much. She wanted to see them grow up, mature. She wanted to support them on their difficult life path. Life is indeed difficult. People need help, support, understanding, love. Meanwhile, Lena was turning the locket in her hands. It had somehow strongly attracted her attention. Finally, she used her nail to pry open the lid. A surprised gasp was heard. Lena covered her mouth with her hand. "It's my mother," the woman finally said, pointing at Kathy's photo. "She's younger here, but it's definitely her. I recognized her." "It can't be." Mrs. Davies hadn't recovered from one shock when another came. "Things like this just don't happen." They do, it turns out. It's definitely Mother. Her eyes, her lips, her nose. I remember her face in the smallest detail. "What was your mother's name?" "Kathy. I named my eldest daughter after her." "Of course! How could I not have guessed right away? And my student was named Kathy. She disappeared when she was a teenager. I didn't help her. I didn't understand in time. She ran away to a camp with a Roma man, and then she gave birth to you. Incredible! I couldn't help Kathy, but I helped her daughter. And you, in turn, saved me." All this still needed to be processed, but at that very moment, Mrs. Davies somehow became completely convinced that the illness had receded and that she now had a life.